JL Kindler, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Peter, for having us today.
So, ways to H, that sounds like something to do with hydrogen, and hydrogen is really hot right now. Can you tell us about it?
Well, hydrogen has been hot for a very long time. It actually is the hottest element on Earth.
Yeah.
When you burn hydrogen, you literally produce a lot of heat. But obviously, this is not the meaning of your question. Yes, hydrogen is quite hot. Hydrogen, very rightly so, is being seen by a lot of authorities, uh, energy users, governments, policymakers as a very possible pathway to a better environment. And so that definitely is something, considering the situation we are in, considering the floods, the climate events, the ice on the poles melting, all those horrible things. It really is something that is very much needed and that is coming at a perfect time.
I agree. And so when I think of hydrogen, it's great for these hard to decarbonize industries, I believe, plus many other uses. But what do you guys do that may be a little bit different from others in your approach to hydrogen?
What we do is actually very different in the sense that typically when you hear about the hydrogen, lately you will hear about something called green hydrogen. And green hydrogen is labeled so first because it is ecological, so therefore it is green. But more specifically, there is a well understood meaning behind this word green, at least in the hydrogen industry, which is that this hydrogen is being produced through electrolysis, splitting water molecules, and this electrolysis being powered by renewable electricity, therefore decarbonized electricity. And it's a great pathway because obviously it is decarbonized, and therefore producing that hydrogen does not generate any CO2 emissions. And hydrogen itself, when being used in a fuel cell, in an internal combustion engine, in a turbine, etc., will also not generate CO2 because it doesn't contain carbon. Great. What we do is, and we have been doing that for quite some time now, we consider that renewable electricity, the one that is earmarked to be used for hydrogen production, is very much needed in more conventional pathways. I'm talking about our current energy grid needs to power our air conditioning, to power our microwave ovens, to power our industries, and more in the future to power charging our battery electric vehicles. What we do is uh, we make use of a very well-known, very ancient, conventional way of producing gases, something called the thermochemical conversion. And what thermochemical conversion is, it originates, it's one of the ways that is being used for making charcoal. When you make charcoal, you put a piece of wood under a hood. You make sure that there is no oxygen coming in because you don't want it to burn. And then you heat that wood up so that all the gases, all the organic molecules that are within the wood will literally be converted into a gas. And what you're left with is solid carbon char. Uh, our process is exactly that, except that it's a little more sophisticated. And what we do is we take renewable sources, we take what we call chemically organic sources. That's anything that is biogenic, biomass, wood, paper, leather, cardboard, etc., but also plastics. And so what I'm leading to actually is the organic fraction of municipal solid waste, the waste that nobody wants and the waste that is a problem because we don't know what to do with it. And we put that under a hood, we heat that up, and through a very specific controlled process, we ultimately end up with hydrogen, that is purified so that it can be used into fuel cells. And the other final product is carbon dioxide, CO2, that is mineralized, that is processed within our system so that not a single molecule of CO2 will go to the air, which means that what we do is, again, it's a thermochemical. So we use heat to convert solid waste into a stream of gases, one being hydrogen and the other one being carbon dioxide that will be sequestered.
Interesting. So that's a unique process. It must be very valuable in terms of taking waste, and the buzzword is circular economy. So taking waste and using it for hydrogen. Now I know, for example, waste is being converted into biogas in many places, but I haven't heard too much about conversion to hydrogen, as you say. Is this a novel process that you guys have invented or patented, or are you licensing it, or tell me a little more about the tech?
So it is, we tried an approach which is both using proven and existing industrially, commercially proven components that we have arranged into a very specific architecture within the process. And that architecture is novel. That architecture is absolutely new. And this is what we have patented. We have patents pending on this, on this process, but it is the basic principle that I described earlier, making charcoal and getting gas, is something that has been known for literally for centuries. Charcoal is a little bit of an, well, not a joke because we use, I mean, everyone uses charcoal, but a more well-known industrial use of those technologies is production of town gas in the early 20th century. Cities in Europe, North America were lit with a gas that literally was produced through a similar process. So it's very well known. It has been more complicated to implement when a few decades ago, um, stakeholders in the waste management industry have started to put municipal solid waste in it. They were seeing this as a good pathway because it is a much cleaner um, way to destroy waste compared with incineration, for example. Uh, but the process architecture that was in place at that time, which I call the conventional gasification processes, were not really designed to handle municipal solid waste properly. And reality is that there has been a little bit of failures and challenges at that time. However, because again, because it is a process, generally speaking, that is much cleaner, and it is a process that can be scaled and implemented fairly easily, there are a few companies that have not given up, and we are about a dozen companies worldwide that are offering solutions, again, that are a really different architecture, so that do not have the issues that the waste industry has known so far. And so together we are, well, we are offering this alternative pathway to the so-called green hydrogen. And you mentioned a very important keyword earlier. You mentioned circular economy. Well, I'm a big fan of any kind of hydrogen, even the so-called the gray hydrogen, the one that's emitting CO2. And we'll talk about that later if you want. But it's very important, I think, to really help building the hydrogen infrastructure globally. And for that, we need any kind of hydrogen. At this point, some of the hydrogen being used in cars in California, for example, is gray. And it's fine because it helps putting hydrogen cars on the road. It helps building this infrastructure. But green hydrogen is clean, is great, is carbon neutral, but it's not really circular economy. It takes electricity that comes from one place. It's in a way, it's a one-way process. You have electricity, you have water, you mix that into a black box, and you get hydrogen. That's great. That's great, but it's not enough. Now, enter waste to hydrogen. We are literally talking about having a community who obviously, because it is active, because it is doing things, generates waste. And that waste being processed locally with a system like ours, that waste being converted into hydrogen, and that hydrogen being also used locally to power the transportation needs as well as the energy needs of this same community. So this is the exact definition of circular economy.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's very exciting. I think the localization aspect. Tell me about your business model. Let's get into that a little bit. Are you guys selling or licensing your technology, or are you guys developing projects, or maybe both?
Um, at this stage and for some time, what we will be doing, and again, this is all about trying to spread and develop those technologies as broadly as possible. We are selling turnkey solutions. So our business model at this point is to go to waste management companies, municipalities, communities, large industrial waste generators, and tell them, here, you have a great solution that you can implement on your territory, in your area. You can get rid of your waste, and with that, you can set a foot into the hydrogen economy either by using this hydrogen for your own needs, think about a community or think about an industry, for example, that generates waste and uses either heat, electricity, or fuel for transportation, or just an entity that would be producing hydrogen. For example, I'm thinking of a few waste management companies I'm talking to who have an obvious need for finding a pathway to get rid of the waste they are handling, but are not necessarily interested in becoming the 21st century Chevron or Mobil Oil. And so in that case, they could just sell this hydrogen to distributors, users, etc. That's our core business model. But of course, we can very well think, and this will be happening at some point of time, think of developing our own projects because obviously we will be in a good position to operate those systems.
And that makes total sense. And so one of the uses we've heard about, and I don't know if you're hearing the same, but for municipalities is buses. So we've heard that there's some interest from municipalities to use hydrogen in their bus fleets because of the charge time and the wait that might happen with an EV bus, for example. Have you heard of that use case? And what other use cases for municipalities are you hearing of for hydrogen? Because ultimately there has to be a use for it.
Actually, I'm doing much more than hearing because yes, you're right. I mean, quite a few of the projects we are involved in relate to using that hydrogen into captive fleet. And it's not only buses, by the way. It can be, we talk about waste management. Uh, the first use that comes to mind for a waste management company is to power the garbage trucks. So yes, absolutely. We actually have a project in the US. Our client who will be acquiring and operating our systems is targeting a school buses fleet. In that particular area, there are mountains, there are very wide temperature ranges. And so battery electric buses will most likely not be a solution. And so the obvious pathway, because they also obviously want to switch from diesel, which is the current common fuel for those buses, the obvious pathway is to switch to hydrogen. And their business model, my client's business model, is to operate those systems, process waste, and also lease the vehicles to bus operators to whom they will also be selling hydrogen. So it's a fairly complex business model, particularly compared with, again, the green hydrogen business model where you buy electricity, you get water produce hydrogen. That's it. But it also has a lot of benefits and advantages. The first one being that because there are several revenue pathways, the risk of having one revenue pathway being challenged is obviously much lower. So it's a potentially more stable business model for our clients is also very attractive. And to complete my answer to your question, we're talking about fuels here, but typically what we see, because this hydrogen economy is still fairly nascent, what we see, at least for probably the first 5 or 10 years coming from now, is a situation where this hydrogen that would be primarily intended for being used as fuel will most likely not totally be used as a fuel. And this is where we see the typical size of our systems producing about 2 to 3 tons hydrogen per day, being the perfect replacement of the 20th century gasoline stand to be converted into the 21st century mobility station, where hydrogen fuel users, buses, trucks, some passenger vehicles will have all the hydrogen they need, but the excess hydrogen, the one that is not being consumed as a fuel, can go into a stationary fuel cell to produce electricity for battery electric vehicles. And if there is still some hydrogen or some electricity left, that electricity can go to the grid to help supporting the conventional users for this renewable, actually better than renewable, this carbon negative electricity. Because the other advantage, of course, compared with solar or wind, is that our systems are producing hydrogen, therefore energy, 24/7.
Absolutely. And so let's talk cost a little bit because that's always the big one. Have you boiled it down to a cost per kilogram in terms of what your systems can do? And I know it might be different in all scenarios. I'm just curious, when we look at gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, we see that gray hydrogen is the cheapest, then comes blue hydrogen, and then the most expensive is green hydrogen. Where do you guys fall on the spectrum of cost?
We don't fall, we rise.
I like it.
Yeah. Uh, it's interesting. For example, we have a project in France where we are coming in because the initial project that was based on electrolytic hydrogen um, actually will not happen because of the energy costs and because of the sudden unexpected rise in hydrogen production cost through electrolysis. And this is kind of what I was trying to say when I talk about business model being not so predictable. If you have an unexpected raise in energy cost, the impact on green hydrogen production cost will be direct and very obviously very sensible. Our systems have basically three revenue. They are based on three revenue streams. The first one is the tipping fees. In other words, the processing fee that our clients, the system operators, are getting because they are taking care and processing the waste from municipalities or from industries. There is a price attached to that. Typically in the US, the average tipping fee for a ton of waste is between $60 and $80 per ton. In Europe, we are talking between 80 and up to 150 in the UK, for example. So it's significant money. And this is the first revenue stream. The second revenue stream, obviously, is energy and hydrogen sales. And a third revenue stream is monetization of the carbon that is being captured and sequestered. This monetization can take place either through carbon credits, And I know some people will say, oh, yes, but carbon credits, they're not stable, they're not in place yet, etc. And I understand that. But the other monetization pathway is because in a lot of cases, that carbon that has been mineralized can actually be sold as a product. And so this very long explanation to proudly tell you that typically in Europe or North America, our hydrogen production cost is in the range of $1 to $2 per kilogram, which makes it slightly more expensive than gray hydrogen, but significantly less expensive than electrolytic hydrogen. And more importantly, again, I insist on this, it is much more predictable, much more potentially stable than the one with electrolytic hydrogen.
That's right. No, certainly makes sense because your feedstock effectively cost should remain relatively stable compared with green hydrogen, where absolutely it seems that power costs are just going to keep going up and up. We're seeing demand curves for power go through the roof as a result of AI driving increased power demand as a result from coming from data centers. So for sure, we're bullish on power prices. So it makes sense that if you want cost effective hydrogen, you want a stable feedstock cost. So it makes
Absolutely.
total sense.
Absolutely. And even gray or blue hydrogen, we need to keep in mind that the first ingredient for this fossil hydrogen is natural gas. There's no need to remind you what the price of natural gas was about a year ago and what impact it actually had on hydrogen costs today. At the pump, I must confess I'm not driving a hydrogen car, but as you can imagine, I'm fairly well informed on the situation in California. At the pump, price of hydrogen was about 2 years ago was $13 to $16 per kilogram. And
Yeah.
it's perfect because it was a full tank at about $80, which is more or less what everyone is paying in California. Again, I know you're in Florida, it's not exactly the same, but it's roughly equivalent to what we were paying with gasoline. Today, like literally today, it is $36 per kilogram.
Oh, wow. It's gone up even more. The last I checked, it was 25. So 36 is not good, but at least there's demand for it. So that is a positive. But yeah, that price is unsustainable at the pump. That is for sure. So let's double click a little on your project you mentioned in France, if we could. Would you say of the projects you have in the pipeline, is that one the most advanced or the furthest along?
The most advanced is actually another one that we have in Eastern Europe, more specifically in Bulgaria. And it's interesting because it reminds me that I forgot to completely answer to one of your questions earlier. That project in Bulgaria is about taking and processing between 25 and 30 tons of waste per day. That waste coming from a recycling center close to the city of Sofia, the capital city of Bulgaria, and producing hydrogen. That hydrogen, as you may not know, but as you may imagine, the hydrogen economy in Bulgaria is still to be developed. But like probably every country in EU and most countries in the world, there is very strong awareness of the issues about climate change, greenhouse gases, etc. So Bulgaria, just like any country, is implementing policies to develop clean, um, net zero, and if possible, even carbon negative energy sources. And so this hydrogen at this point is expected to power a few buses, but most of it will actually go into the natural gas pipelines to be injected to mitigate the carbon intensity and the carbon impact of the conventional uses of natural gas. And this is a market I think we will see a lot, at least while the hydrogen economy and the hydrogen infrastructure gets developed, gets broadened, gets more widespread.
Makes sense. So Bulgaria, France, any other locations you'd like to highlight where you guys are working?
We are also currently building a pilot system in India with a local partner. And it's yet another use for hydrogen in that particular project. The system will be again processing waste from a city in the state of Maharashtra, where Mumbai is, and will be feeding hydrogen to a local chemical plant who uses hydrogen as a part of their process. So it's not an energy use, it's not transportation, it's just the plain normal use of hydrogen being considered as a chemical. We also have we have been selected by the I like to talk about this one because everyone knows about it almost. We have been selected by the Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport to be part of a consortium of 11 companies, and this is also important because no human being and no company is an island. We need to work on collaborative projects. So we are part of a consortium of 11 companies whose job and whose mission is to start building the hydrogen infrastructure around airports. And this is also something that's very important because airports, like seaports, by the way, are welcoming a lot of waste, and they have a significant need for energy. And they also, because they are part of the transportation industry, they are also well known as being massive CO2 emitters. So whatever can be done to mitigate this carbon impact is, of course, very important.
That sounds like an exciting project. And we have heard some positive tailwinds, let's say, behind airport initiatives. So that's really good. Have you heard anything about, is the hydrogen going to be gaseous or liquefied? We've heard maybe on planes or large, big trucks, it might be liquefied, but of course, hydrogen has to be really cold to be a liquid. So I'm curious what you've heard in that regard.
You know, one of the reasons I mentioned circular economy, I did not insist too much on the fact that our systems, we have specifically designed our systems to be fairly small scale. And one of the reasons for this is, on top of trying to address the circular economy questions, it's also because we were very mindful and we are very mindful of logistics. Logistics around waste, of course, because no one wants to see a fleet of garbage trucks taking waste over hundreds and hundreds of miles, but also around hydrogen, because yes, it is still very difficult to move hydrogen from point A to point B, and it is still fairly difficult and expensive to compress or to put hydrogen into some sort of a container that would be small enough to efficiently and easily use it on trucks, buses, planes, even cars. And so liquefaction definitely is a pathway. It's at this point, it is most efficient on the large scale operations, typically over 5 tons hydrogen per day. And to give you an idea, in a truck, you will put about 30, 40, sometimes 60 kilograms hydrogen. So, well, you need a lot of trucks to actually use those 5 tons. The other pathway, and the one that is, I would say, the most advanced, and that has been used again for decades, is just to compress it. And typically, Toyota Mirai fuel cell car holds 5 kilograms of hydrogen. And those 5 kilograms of hydrogen, in terms of energy, are the equivalent of the 15, 25 gallon tank that we see in conventional gasoline cars. And those 5 kilogram hydrogen actually at this point they take more space than the 20 gallons of gasoline we have. Not much more, so that in the Mirai, you still have a trunk, you can still put suitcases, etc. So it works, but it is still a challenge. So I think at some point of time, just like any kind of industry, just like solar panels, just like fuel cells, there will be significant improvements in the cost and in the technologies around hydrogen compression or hydrogen storage. It is still something that needs to be decided. We'll probably see something similar to the old war between VHS and Betamax. You know about this. I know about this. Maybe some of our readers don't know about this. They don't even know what Betamax can be. But it's something we still need a few years to know for sure which pathway is going to be taken.
It's definitely going to take some time. I'll give a shout out to a local company here in Florida called Gen H2 that's
Yeah.
doing hydrogen liquefaction on a small scale. So we hope that they'll continue to progress, and we're rooting for them and every company in the hydrogen economy, because we really need, as you say, everybody to be successful.
Exactly.
Well, JL, I do detect a bit of an accent. So are you originally from France?
So I'm 60 years old. I spent 20 years of my life in France, actually 25. 20 years of my life in Japan, and I've been in Los Angeles since 2013. So, as I like to say, I am a citizen. Yes, but my passport is French, yes.
Very good. And be honest, which one do you like the most?
I loved working in Japan. I will love retiring in France. And I absolutely love being in California right now.
All great things. I always joke you want to make your money in the States and spend it in Europe. So I like your retirement plan.
Well, to be perfectly honest, with the taxes I pay in California, it doesn't make much difference with France. But it's, the entrepreneurship, the enthusiasm, dynamism we see in the US is, I mean, second to none. So this is what makes being an entrepreneur in the US is absolutely lovely and perfect. I love the work ethics and the organization and the structure. And well, I loved a lot of things about Japan. Obviously, I stayed there 20 years. And I absolutely love the French way of life. As I tell my friends, at least my friends here in the US, uh, you want to go to France when you're on vacation, you have nothing to do, enjoying life, and when you have a lot of money.
I couldn't agree more. I spent six weeks once in kind of a mini retirement over in Europe and loved the lifestyle to death. It really is incredible. The pace over there is just a pleasure. So it's
But
great.
I must say that we also need to recognize that France is a very big industrial nation, and that we do have a significant market for hydrogen there, and not only for hydrogen. There are plenty of very fine French companies that do a great job, and I certainly don't want to diminish or to talk down about this. But well, that's my personal reality.
For sure, it's true. And there's many great companies in France and in the UK, in Germany, and many other places. And increasingly in Eastern Europe, there's a lot of really nice emerging companies over there.
Absolutely. And reality again is that I do see, to go back to our business model, we sell turnkey systems. We do that in partnership with a fairly large EPC company and engineering, procurement and construction, who delivers and who can deliver anywhere in the world. I'm not saying I think I will be selling a lot of systems in Mongolia or in some specific places, but definitely our mission is to offer our solutions wherever there are human beings. Therefore, wherever there is waste to be processed and energy to be produced. Now, this being said, the our closest market, I do see our primary market being equally North America and Europe. As you said, Western or Eastern doesn't make much.
That's great to hear. And one of the amazing things about hydrogen is that localized aspect, as you mentioned, the ability to produce it anywhere. which you can't exactly do so well with oil and gas. So it is a nice advantage for hydrogen. And I think hydrogen has to take advantage of that to minimize transport costs and also, of course, be as circular and friendly for the economy, for the environment as it can be.
You're totally right. And circular is obviously good, but distributed is also important. Sometimes I like to say that we're trying to build the internet of waste management and hydrogen production. Uh, Having several distributed sites means more resilience, means more predictable operations, because any sort of industrial process, there are maintenance stops, there can be accidents, there can be earthquakes, tornadoes, there can be terrorism, there can be all sorts of things. And therefore, having distributed solutions makes this overall operation much more predictable, much safer, and with a much higher resilience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. With distributed systems comes increased resilience. So I think it's hugely important. JL, we have a lot of investors that listen into our show. Have you guys taken any outside investment capital? Are you currently raising around? Where are you guys in terms of investors?
I'm actually right in the middle of a big love call to external investors. External is the key word. So far, we have been financed uh, basically by friends and family. We have raised a few $1 million through that, so it's not exactly like angels. But I mentioned this project in Bermuda. Right now, we are in our transition to generating revenue. And to support that, we need a little bit more of working capital. And so, yes, we are currently raising funds, and we would welcome external investors, strategic, dormant, family offices. To be perfectly honest, at this point, it is not something for which we do have a wide preference, but definitely, yes, we are seeking
Good to know.
right
So,
the right.
JL, that leads the question: how can the audience get in touch with you?
Well, www.ways2h.com. That's WAYS number 2H. And my name, Jean-Louis Kindler, can be found on LinkedIn. So probably if you Google Kindler, Ways2H, or Kindler Hydrogen, you should be finding something to reach out.
Very good. JL Kindler, it's really been a pleasure having you on the show. This has been JL Kindler, Ways to H, and they have an amazing thermochemical process to convert waste into renewable hydrogen. It's very well needed and a very well conceived solution. Thank you for being on, JL.
Thank you very much for having us today. Thank you, Peter.